In the late 1990s, the American living room simply stopped accommodating the Polk audio stereo dimensional array. The massive SDA flagship towers, with their imposing walnut cabinets and complex arrays of drivers, were quietly discontinued. A few years prior, these 150-pound monoliths commanded the floors of independent stereo stores across the country. They required heavy amplification, a perfectly centered listening chair, and a proprietary umbilical cord that connected the left and right speakers together to physically cancel interaural crosstalk. The acoustic flaw where the left ear hears what the right speaker is playing. They were an engineering triumph that cost up to $3,200 a pair. It was a serious investment for the middle-class American hi-fi enthusiast. But when the retail market shifted, the physical demands of that perfection became a liability. The umbilical cord that made the stereo magic possible suddenly tangled with the reality of 5-channel surround sound receivers. Stereo dealers who once used the SDA to drop the jaws of walk-in customers found themselves selling smaller, compromised satellite speakers to match the television. The dedicated listening room was disappearing. With it went the floor space, required to house a massive wall of stereo sound. The paradox was that the SDA did not fail because the acoustic engineering was flawed. It failed because it had perfectly solved the problems of 2-channel stereo, just as America decided that 2 channels were no longer enough. A decade earlier, its massive physical footprint meant uncompromising acoustic trust. Now, it just meant it was in the way of the screen. But the real story of the Polk SDA is not merely the discontinuation of a heavy wooden tower. It is the story of the American audio market's transition from the pursuit of the perfect stereo illusion to the convenience of the home theater, and what is lost when a living room stops being a place to actively listen and becomes a place to merely watch. Every week, we tell the stories of the American speakers, audio brands, and listening rooms that once shaped how people heard music, movies, and memory, and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place in a small listening room in Baltimore, Maryland, in 1982. The story begins in Baltimore, Maryland, in 1971. Matthew Polk and George Klopfer, 2 recent graduates of Johns Hopkins University with backgrounds in physics and engineering, did not initially set out to redesign the American living room. They started out outdoors, building large PA speakers, public address systems designed to project live sound to a crowd, for local bluegrass conventions. When that early venture failed to sustain a business, they turned their attention indoors, focusing on the booming domestic market for home stereo equipment. At the time, the American hi-fi landscape was rigidly divided. At the top of the market sat expensive, low-production audiophile speakers that required massive amplification and commanded premium prices. At the bottom were cheap, mass-market boxes sold in department stores that offered muddy bass and harsh treble. There was a glaring gap in the middle. The American middle class, teachers, mechanics, office workers, and college students, wanted the clarity of high-end equipment, but needed it at a price that could actually be justified on a working salary. Working out of a massive, drafty Victorian mansion in Baltimore that served as a makeshift speaker factory, Polk and Klopfer began developing the Monitor series. They utilized high-quality components, simple crossovers, the electrical networks inside a speaker that sent bass and treble to the correct drivers, and sturdy wooden cabinets. They priced them aggressively. The resulting speakers did not just sound good for the money, they sounded legitimately excellent. Over the next decade, Polk Audio grew from a small garage-style operation into a serious manufacturing force. The Baltimore factory expanded. The workforce multiplied. The brand became a staple in the rapidly growing network of independent American stereo stores, where trusted local dealers demonstrated equipment to eager buyers. Polk had successfully democratized high-quality sound. But solving the price-to-performance ratio was primarily a business victory. Matthew Polk was looking for an acoustic victory. Despite the incredible advancements in speaker design throughout the 1970s, the American listening room still suffered from a fundamental, unavoidable limitation. No matter how much money a buyer spent on a receiver, a turntable, or a pair of beautifully veneered cabinets, the music remained physically trapped. When a listener sat down in a basement or a living room, positioned perfectly in the center of two conventional speakers, they expected to hear a wide soundstage, the perceived width, depth, and placement of music created by a stereo system. But the illusion almost always stopped exactly at the physical edges of the wooden boxes. The music never seemed to extend beyond the left and right cabinets. The problem was not the recording. The problem was the human head. When you sit at a live concert, an instrument playing on the far left side of the stage reaches your left ear first. Your head casts an acoustic shadow, meaning your right ear hears a significantly muffled, delayed version of that same sound. Your brain processes that micro delay and tells you exactly where the instrument is located in the physical space. It is a massive, immersive experience. But in a living room, standard stereo speakers destroyed that illusion. When the left speaker played a sound meant only for the left ear, the sound wave traveled across the room, hit the left ear, and then wrapped right around the listener's face to enter the right ear a fraction of a millisecond later. The right speaker did the exact same thing in reverse. This was interaural crosstalk, the acoustic phenomenon where sound meant exclusively for one ear bleeds across the head and is picked up by the opposite ear, effectively collapsing the width of the music. Interaural crosstalk was the invisible enemy of the American stereo illusion. Every living room, every listening chair, every stereo pair suffered from it. Acoustic engineers knew it existed, but trying to fix it usually involved complex, highly expensive electronic processors that degraded the purity of the audio signal. Matthew Polk believed he could solve the problem not with a digital processor, but with raw, physical acoustic engineering. He realized that if a speaker could generate a secondary, out-of-phase sound wave that arrived at the opposite ear at the exact moment the unwanted crosstalk arrived, the two sound waves would collide and cancel each other out in mid-air. In 1982, Polk Audio unveiled the result of this theory, the SDA-1, the Stereo Dimensional Array. The American entry of the SDA was a shock to the audio market. The SDA-1 was not a standard speaker. It was a massive, heavy tower that contained a complex matrix of drivers, the moving parts of a speaker, that physically push air to create sound. Half of the drivers handled the normal stereo signal. The other half, the dimensional drivers, were dedicated entirely to firing the exact cancellation signals needed to eliminate interaural crosstalk. To make this physical cancellation work, the two speakers had to communicate. They were tethered together by a proprietary interconnect cable, a thick black umbilical cord that ran across the living room floor from the left cabinet to the right cabinet, sharing the left and right audio signals between the two towers. It was a bold, heavy, and complicated piece of engineering. At approximately $1,700 a pair, roughly $5,300 in modern currency, it was a massive financial leap for a brand that had built its reputation on middle-class affordability. It tested the limits of what a mainstream American buyer would spend. But then, the audio press heard them. In late 1982, Julian Hirsch, the legendary and notoriously conservative audio critic for Stereo Review magazine, tested the SDA-1. Hirsch rarely used hyperbole. He was a man of strict measurements, but in his review, he called the SDA experience astounding. He reported that the soundstage did not just hover between the speakers, it wrapped entirely around the room, extending feet past the physical boundaries of the cabinets. Instruments seemed to materialize out of thin air along the side walls of the listening room. It was an immediate, undeniable, physical sensation. You did not have to be a trained audiophile to hear it. You just had to sit in the chair. The theory was brilliant on paper, but to survive in America, it had to be sold in the listening rooms of local stereo stores. The breakthrough of the stereo dimensional array did not happen in a laboratory. It happened on the carpeted floors of independent American stereo stores. To understand how the SDA conquered the mid-1980s audio market, you have to place yourself in a dedicated listening room at a regional hi-fi chain like Tweeter, etc. In New England, Bryn Mawr Stereo in Pennsylvania, Sound Advice in Florida, or Meyer Emco in Washington, D.C. When a prospective buyer walked into one of these showrooms in 1983, they were usually seated in a single, carefully positioned chair. This was the sweet spot, the exact uncompromising center point between the two speakers where the stereo image, the illusion of sound coming from distinct physical locations, is perfectly balanced. In front of the buyer stood a pair of SDA ones. They were formidable pieces of furniture. Each cabinet stood nearly 3 feet tall, wrapped in heavy walnut veneer, weighing 85 pounds. Behind the black cloth grille, the front baffle was crowded with components. There were 2 tweeters, small drivers designed to reproduce high frequencies like cymbals and vocal breath, and 4 mid-range drivers, the moving cones that handle the middle frequencies where most instruments live. Below them was a large passive radiator, a speaker-like cone without a voice coil that moves only from internal air pressure to reinforce deep bass. But the physical arrangement of these drivers was highly unusual. They were clustered in distinct columns. The inner column of drivers played the standard left or right stereo channel. The outer column of drivers, however, did not play normal music. These were the dimensional drivers, specialized moving parts dedicated exclusively to firing an out-of-phase acoustic cancellation signal. To make this complex matrix function, the dealer had to connect the 2 massive wooden cabinets together. This was the defining physical characteristic of the SDA system, the interconnect cable. It was a thick, black wire that physically bridged the left speaker to the right speaker. This umbilical cord acted as a signaling pathway. It took the left audio channel, inverted its phase, and sent it across the room to the right speaker's dimensional drivers. It did the same for the right channel, sending it to the left speaker. When the stereo salesman finally dropped the needle on a record, the result was a visceral, disorienting acoustic shock. At the exact millisecond that the unwanted sound from the left speaker attempted to wrap around the listener's head to reach their right ear, the right speaker's dimensional driver fired a precisely timed mirror image signal. The 2 sound waves collided in the air just inches from the listener's face. The physical laws of acoustics took over. The positive wave met the negative wave, and the unwanted crosstalk was completely canceled out. The acoustic consequence of this cancellation was staggering. The heavy walnut cabinet seemed to entirely vanish from the room. The soundstage, the perceived width, depth, and physical boundaries of the music did not just hover between the 2 boxes. It exploded outward. Listeners reported hearing guitars playing 3 feet to the left of the left cabinet. They heard background vocals emerging from the side walls of the listening room. The music surrounded them in a massive 3-dimensional arc, all generated by 2 wooden boxes and a pure, unmanipulated analog stereo signal. For the American hi-fi dealer, the SDA was a dream. It was a product that sold itself purely through physical demonstration. You did not have to convince a buyer with an engineering brochure. You only had to seat them in the chair, plug in the interconnect cable, and watch their eyes widen as the walls of the showroom seemed to disappear. This acoustic magic created a powerful commercial moat. Competitors were stunned by the reviews in Audio Magazine and High Fidelity. Other brands had attempted to widen the soundstage using electronic delay boxes or by bouncing reflected sound, audio that bounces off walls before reaching the listener, off the back walls of the room. But Polk's approach was direct, physical, and heavily patented. A competing brand could not simply wire a driver backwards to achieve the same effect. They lacked Matthew Polk's proprietary crossover network and the heavily engineered interconnect system. If a buyer wanted true interaural crosstalk cancellation, they had to buy a Polk SDA. But the most important aspect of the SDA breakthrough was its price. At roughly $1,700 for a pair of the SDA ones, the system was unquestionably expensive for the average consumer. In the early 1980s, an American mechanic, school teacher, or mid-level manager might take home $300 or $400 a week. To purchase the speakers, along with a high-current stereo receiver and a quality turntable, required a serious financial commitment. Yet, in the context of the American high-end audio market, it was a democratic miracle. At the extreme end of the audiophile spectrum, massive systems like the Infinity IRS, or exotic electrostatic panels, commanded $20,000 to $30,000. Polk Audio had delivered a world-class, state-of-the-art acoustic illusion for the price of a used car, not the price of a house. The SDA became a status symbol for the working professional who cared deeply about music. It bridged the gap between the esoteric, unreachable audiophile world and the mainstream American living room. It proved that a complex, heavy, demanding piece of acoustic engineering could scale across the country, supported by a network of passionate local dealers and enthusiastic magazines. The badge on the grille was not decoration, it was a promise about sound. The interconnect cable had created an illusion no other speaker could match. It also tethered the company to a specific kind of two-channel purity that was about to be challenged. Following the astonishing critical reception of the original SDA-1 in 1982, Polk Audio did not rest. The company realized they had uncovered a physical acoustic principle that could scale. Over the next 5 years, the Baltimore factory went into overdrive, transforming Matthew Polk's crosstalk cancellation theory into an entire empire of heavy, complex wooden towers. To understand the peak of the stereo-dimensional array, you have to look at the American audio retail landscape of the mid-1980s. This was the golden age of the independent stereo store. Before the internet flattened prices and consumer reviews, Americans bought their audio equipment by walking into dedicated listening rooms. The SDA was quickly championed by some of the most influential hi-fi retailers in the country: Sound Advice in Florida, Tweeter, etc. in New England, Bryn Mawr Stereo in the Mid-Atlantic, Magnolia Hi-Fi in the Pacific Northwest, and the early high-end audio rooms within Circuit City all became crucial staging grounds. Crutchfield, the massive mail-order catalog out of Virginia, devoted entire pages to explaining Polk's dimensional technology to Americans living hundreds of miles away from a physical showroom. In these carpeted, dimly lit stereo stores, the SDA was the ultimate closer. Salesmen learned that they did not need to talk to sell the speaker. They only needed to connect the umbilical cord and play a well-recorded album. The physical demonstration was undeniable. By 1985, Polk Audio decided to push the SDA concept to its absolute physical and acoustic limit. They introduced the SDA-SRS, the Signature Reference System. If the original SDA-1 was a large speaker, the SDA-SRS was an architectural statement. Standing nearly 5.5 feet tall and weighing 165 pounds each, a pair of SRS towers dominated any room they occupied. The front baffle of a single cabinet housed a staggering array of components. There was a massive 15-inch fluid-coupled passive radiator. Above it sat 4 separate 6.5-inch mid-bass drivers handling the normal stereo signal, and 4 more 6.5-inch dimensional drivers dedicated solely to crosstalk cancellation. Next to them was a vertical line of 4 dome tweeters. It was a physical manifestation of American audio excess, but it was not built for show. Every driver had a precise mathematical purpose. The massive surface area of the combined drivers meant the speaker could move an incredible volume of air with very little physical exertion, dropping acoustic distortion. The unwanted changes added to the sound by the speaker pushing past its limits to nearly imperceptible levels. The price was equally massive, nearly $3,000 a pair in 1985, roughly equivalent to $8,500 today. Yet, they sold. They sold to doctors, lawyers, mechanics who saved for months, and obsessive hi-fi enthusiasts who wanted the absolute pinnacle of stereo imaging. In a standard American living room, where two conventional boxes could make a beautifully recorded vinyl record, sound flat and contained, the Polk SDA SRS could make the walls seem to disappear, expanding the physical footprint of the music until the listener felt anchored in the center of a live acoustic space. This was the cultural peak for Polk audio. In 1985, Audio Magazine named the SDA-SRS the Speaker of the Year. Matthew Polk, often photographed in his trademark white lab coat holding a speaker driver, became a highly recognizable figure in the pages of Stereo Review and High Fidelity. The company's marketing leaned heavily into this image, the earnest American engineer who had beaten the odds and outsmarted the physics of the listening room. The transition from analog records to the compact disc in the mid-1980s only accelerated their dominance. The CD brought a dead-silent background and massive dynamic shifts that punished lesser speakers. The SDA line, particularly the SRS, was perfectly positioned for the CD era. The vast soundstage capability of the dimensional array made early, hyper-separated stereo CD mixes sound like holographic events. It was not just a speaker, it was a necessary tool for the new digital frontier of American audio. The success of the massive SDA-SRS proved that Matthew Polk's crosstalk cancellation theory was not just an acoustic novelty, it was a highly desirable, premium listening experience. But the company understood the structural reality of the American audio market. You could build prestige with a 165-pound, $3,000 flagship tower, but you built a financially stable empire by selling to the middle class. Polk Audio quickly moved to democratize their own invention. They expanded the SDA line downward, creating a full hierarchy of dimensional speakers. They introduced the SDA-2 and the SDA-1B, which offered the same core intraaural crosstalk cancellation in slightly smaller, more affordable floor-standing cabinets. Then they engineered the SDA-CRS, the compact reference system. This was a bookshelf speaker, a smaller cabinet designed to sit on a heavy speaker stand rather than occupying massive floor space. It utilized a single-dimensional driver, a standard stereo mid-range driver, a tweeter, and a rear-firing passive radiator. Suddenly, the holographic wall-to-wall soundstage of the flagship towers was available for under $1,000. The SDA-CRS allowed the dimensional array to migrate out of dedicated, wealthy listening rooms and into college dorms, small apartments, and crowded suburban family rooms. The physical manufacturing presence required to support this expansion was immense. Throughout the late 1980s, the Baltimore factory was humming. Wood shops turned out miles of heavy oak and walnut veneer, the thin layer of attractive wood used on the outside of a speaker cabinet. Assembly lines painstakingly soldered the incredibly complex crossover boards required to separate the standard stereo signal from the dimensional cancellation signal. At its peak, Polk Audio was shipping tens of thousands of SDA speakers across the United States. They had secured a massive dealer network. Hundreds of independent American stereo stores, from regional powerhouses to single-room audio boutiques, relied on the SDA as their premium demonstration piece. The brand had achieved the rare audio trifecta. They had the respect of snobbish audiophile critics, the enthusiastic support of retail salesmen, and the financial trust of the American consumer. To own a pair of SDA speakers during this era was to make a definitive statement about how you valued music. It required physical and electrical commitment. The complex matrix of drivers presented a difficult impedance, the electrical load a speaker presents to an amplifier. You could not power a large SDA tower with a cheap mass-market department store receiver. It demanded high-current amplification. Furthermore, you could not casually place them in a room. They had to be measured, spaced perfectly apart, and kept away from side walls. And of course, you had to run the thick, black interconnect cable across the floor to tether the left and right channels together. But for the listener who followed the rules, the reward was absolute. In a dimly lit American basement, where a long day of labor usually ended in front of a screen, the SDA demanded something different. It asked the listener to sit perfectly still in the sweet spot, close their eyes, and let two wooden cabinets turn the physical boundaries of the wall into a live concert hall. The room did not care about the marketing brochure. The vinyl record did not care about the badge on the grill. The speaker either disappeared into the music or it did not. And in those late 80s living rooms, the SDA consistently disappeared, leaving only the musicians in the room. It was the absolute zenith of the dedicated two-channel American listening room. Every component, from the needle on the turntable to the umbilical cord connecting the speakers, was designed to serve a pure, analog stereo signal. The SDA had conquered the two-channel listening room, but the American living room was slowly turning its attention away from the turntable and toward the television. By the early 1990s, the small cracks in the American hi-fi landscape had widened into a chasm. The Polk SDA line, once the undisputed king of the two-channel showroom, began to struggle. The issue was not that the speakers sounded worse. In fact, they had never sounded better. The problem was that the American living room itself was being fundamentally reconfigured. The first, quiet indicator of the decline was not a drop in sales volume, but a change in the dealer's tone. Polk had built its reputation on the strength of independent, high-end stereo stores, where salesmen were audio fanatics who understood the technical wizardry of interaural crosstalk cancellation. But those stores were facing an existential threat. They were being squeezed by the rise of big-box retail chains, massive stores like Circuit City and Best Buy that prioritized volume, low pricing, and broad brand availability over specialized demonstration. In a Circuit City aisle, you could not properly demonstrate the SDA. There was no quiet, sound-treated room. There was no comfortable chair placed at the perfect center point. There was only a noisy, chaotic environment where a salesman, often a teenager without deep audio training, would try to explain the necessity of a thick, black umbilical cord connecting two 5-foot towers. To the average shopper looking for a system to match their television, the SDA didn't look like the future of audio. It looked like an expensive, complicated relic that required too much floor space and too much setup. Then came the technological disruption that Polk could not physically cancel: Dolby Pro logic. The mid-90s marked the birth of the modern home theater era. Surround sound receivers hit the mass market. Suddenly, American buyers did not want 2 perfect channels. They wanted 5. They wanted explosions behind them and dialogue coming from a speaker tucked under their television. The SDA, by its very design, was a 2-channel purist system. It required a pure, unadulterated stereo signal to function. When you fed the output of a multi-channel Dolby processor into an SDA system, the proprietary crosstalk cancellation circuitry collapsed. It became a mess. The dimensional drivers, which were engineered to create a holographic soundstage, were now being fed inconsistent, processed digital signals. The magic vanished. The music sounded thin, localized, and confused. A buyer could not simply upgrade to a home theater receiver and keep their SDA towers. They had to choose. They could keep their high-fidelity two-channel dream, or they could join the multi-channel home theater revolution. As television screens grew larger and VCRs were replaced by DVD players, the screen, not the stereo image, became the center of the American living room. Polk Audio, like almost every other American speaker maker, faced a brutal choice. They could remain a boutique, two-channel specialist and likely fade away as the stereo store era ended, or they could adapt to the new mass-market demand for home theater. They chose the latter. They began engineering smaller, magnetic-shielded speakers that could sit right next to a television without warping the picture. They developed dedicated center-channel speakers. They moved away from the complex, high-effort engineering of the SDA-SRS toward the high-volume, easy-to-install world of affordable home theater packages. The longtime loyalists, the collectors, and the independent hi-fi dealers felt the shift immediately. The catalog began to shrink. The complex crossover boards that were once hand-built in Baltimore were becoming too expensive to manufacture domestically. The SDA line, the crown jewel of Polk's engineering heritage, was slowly pushed to the margins of the product catalog, then to the discontinued list. The retreat was not sudden. It was a slow, agonizing erosion of the brand's identity. The first major crack appeared when Polk began to outsource the manufacturing of their lower-tier speaker lines to Asia. The goal was simple: survival. To compete with the influx of low-cost, mass-produced electronics flooding American retailers, they needed to lower their production costs. But for the loyalists who had grown up with the Baltimore-made monitors and the SDA flagships, the shift was a betrayal of the brand's promise. The badge on the grille remained the same, but the wood veneer felt thinner, the cabinets resonated more, and the crossovers, those essential networks of capacitors and inductors that defined the Polk sound, were replaced with cheaper, mass-produced components. The dealer network, the backbone of Polk's success, began to fracture. Independent stereo stores, unable to compete with the pricing power of the big-box giants, closed their doors one by one. As these listening rooms vanished, so did the SDA's primary vehicle for success. You cannot sell a complex, room-filling, crosstalk-canceling array on a crowded, noisy shelf at a warehouse retailer. By the mid-2000s, the SDA was effectively a ghost. It existed only in the memories of aging audiophiles and the cluttered pages of vintage audio forums. The factory in Baltimore that had once hummed with the assembly of the SDA-SRS was repurposed or silenced. The engineers who had spent years perfecting the dimensional array were tasked with designing Bluetooth speakers, soundbars, and thin wall-mounted satellite systems. The corporate consolidation of the audio industry had claimed another victim. Polk Audio was eventually sold, merged, and moved into a larger, global parent company. The name was licensed, stretched, and placed onto products that bore no resemblance to the original vision. The brand badge became a generic identifier for mass-market consumer audio. The collapse of the American speaker empire was not a singular event. It was a slow, inevitable surrender to a market that no longer valued the physical footprint of high fidelity. The American living room had changed. The dedicated listening chair was pushed into the corner. The stereo rack was sold. The two-channel illusion was replaced by the multi-channel spectacle of home theater, and later by the total convenience of the wireless, portable, streaming speaker. The factory closed. The dealer vanished. The showroom went silent. The catalog dropped the model. The engineering philosophy was abandoned. The badge moved overseas. The stereo rack disappeared. The soundbar took its place. The American speaker dream had so. The Polk SDA story does not end with the final box leaving the warehouse. It continues in a subterranean network of dedicated enthusiasts, collectors, and engineers who have refused to let the dimensional array fade into obsolescence. Today, the SDA lives on through a secondary market, a vibrant global ecosystem of estate sales, eBay listings, AudioGone classifieds, and specialized vintage audio forums. There is a singular reason why these speakers still matter, and it goes beyond the warmth of nostalgia. An original SDA-SRS or SDA-1C, when properly restored by careful hands, can still do something that almost no modern home theater system, regardless of its digital processing or expensive wireless connectivity, can replicate. It creates a massive, physical, three-dimensional soundstage using purely analog acoustic principles. Modern enthusiasts spend hundreds of hours tracking down the original, increasingly rare interconnect cables. They perform recapping, the process of replacing the aging, drift-prone capacitors in the crossover networks with high-precision modern components. They source replacement tweeters, specifically the upgraded RD0194 Silk Dome drivers that Polk later offered as a service, to restore the high-frequency clarity that time had dulled. They painstakingly reseal the heavy cabinets and replace the deteriorated foam surrounds on the woofers. They do this because they know that when the air moves in a large, sealed walnut cabinet, it creates a tactile, visceral experience that a plastic soundbar can only simulate, never embody. They restore these speakers not because they are old, but because sound still begins where air moves. If you go looking for the original factory site in Baltimore today, you won't find a monument to the dimensional array. You might find a generic office park, a repurposed warehouse, or an empty lot, a quiet footnote in the city's industrial history. The original cabinet shop that once turned out miles of oak veneer has long since been demolished or converted. The assembly lines that once hummed with the sound of thousands of drivers being tested are now silent, occupied by businesses that have no memory of crosstalk cancellation or dimensional sound. Yet, there is a surprising footnote to the SDA story. The patent remains a case study in university engineering programs. The principles of interaural crosstalk cancellation, while largely abandoned by the mass-market consumer industry in favor of cheaper DSP-based surround sound, are still cited in papers regarding acoustic imaging and professional studio design. The engineering was never wrong. It was simply too expensive, too large, and too demanding for a consumer market that prioritized convenience over the physical illusion of reality. What does this American audio story reveal? It reveals a fundamental tension in the American character. We say we value craftsmanship, fidelity, and the repairable, honest engineering that can anchor a piece of music in a room. But the market we built consistently rewards the opposite: the cheap, the portable, the wireless, the disposable, and the immediately convenient. We built the most impressive speakers in the world, and then we systematically decided that they took up too much space. We sacrificed the living room stereo for the sake of the television screen. We sacrificed the soundstage for the sake of the soundbar. We sacrificed the physical experience of sitting between two cabinets for the convenience of holding a Bluetooth speaker in one hand. The American audio market is a character that loves to build, but it has never learned how to stay. It moves in waves, leaving behind a trail of abandoned factories, closed stereo stores, and forgotten technologies that once promised to change the world. And yet the history of the SDA proves that if you build something with enough integrity, it will never truly die. It will simply wait, passed from one generation of listener to the next, surviving in the basements and garages of those who still believe that music is not just something you watch, but something you move through. Somewhere in an American basement, a pair of old walnut speakers still stands beside a silver receiver, the grill cloth faded, the badge intact, waiting for one more record to move the room. See you in the next one.